According to a report by the American Institute for Drug Research, around 30 to 40 million people worldwide have tried magic mushrooms at least once. But why does this tiny mushroom have such a strange and powerful effect on our brains? Is this experience just a hallucination, or is it actually a gateway to a deeper understanding of the human mind? Well, in this program, we're going to dive right into this mystery and see how a tiny mushroom can completely change the complex structure of our brains and emotions. We'll also answer the question of why, these days, doctors and scientists are prescribing this mushroom for medical purposes. So I won't keep you waiting. Let's get straight to the video. Imagine you're walking through a forest, surrounded by lush greenery, with the fresh scent of rain-soaked earth in the air. You're enjoying nature when suddenly you spot a mushroom that doesn't look like any other mushroom you've ever seen. This mushroom has unique colors and a strange, unusual shape. Without thinking, you reach out, pick it up, and take a bite. That's the magic mushroom. Now let me tell you what happens in your brain after you eat this mushroom. Exactly everything you see is just as you're experiencing it. When you consume a magic mushroom, a compound called psilocybin enters your body, which is then converted in the liver into psilocin. Simply put, psilocybin itself is a precursor that gets turned into its active form, psilocin, inside your body. This conversion happens pretty quickly and produces psychedelic effects. In fact, psilocin acts like a magic key that attaches to serotonin receptors in the brain. Serotonin is one of the most important neurotransmitters that controls our mood and feelings. In a way, serotonin is like a messenger that tells nerve cells what kind of feeling they should have. But psilocin causes these messengers to become overactive, and the brain starts to function in a completely different way. You should know that the human brain usually follows specific, well-established pathways, but after taking magic mushrooms, it suddenly becomes like a winding, intricate road that leads nerve cells through new and unfamiliar routes, causing significant changes in the perception of time, space, colors, and even emotions. Some people who have used magic mushrooms describe these experiences by saying, for example, that colors seem more vivid, or they feel like time is speeding up, slowing down, or even standing still. In other words, under the influence of magic mushrooms, time can feel stretched out or compressed. That's why some people feel like several hours passed in just a few minutes. Others say it felt like a lifetime went by, but in reality, they're just experiencing everything more deeply and meaningfully. Of course, it's not all just hallucination. Well, as I said, the brain is traveling new pathways and experiencing changes. But these changes can be positive, negative, or even frightening. Now, let me introduce you to a technical concept. A trip refers to the unique psychological and mental experience that comes after using magic mushrooms or other hallucinogenic substances. When we go on a trip, our senses, what we see, what we hear, and even the way we think become completely different and often strange and unusual. Sometimes, a person even feels like the boundary between themselves and the world around them has faded, and it's as if everything is becoming connected. But while a trip can feel like an exciting journey, it can also sometimes be scary and distressing. For example, some people feel like cats are winking at them or objects are talking. In these situations, if the sensations become scarier and more disturbing, this experience is called a bad trip. But wait, things get even more exciting. The dose of magic mushrooms and how you take them can change the trip experience from a calming sensation to a full-blown psychological journey. For example, 0.5 gram to 1.5 grams might just make colors a bit more vivid or boost creativity. But between 1.5 to 3 grams, it can open the gates of your mind to a whole new world. In fact, you can journey deep into your mind and confront your subconscious, your fears, joys, and memories that may have always been locked away. This experience is like a psychological death and rebirth, which can be both thrilling and terrifying. But when you take a very high dose, meaning between 3 to 5 grams or even more, a part of the brain called the default mode network, which is responsible for conscious and identity-based thinking, gradually shuts down. These mental and self-awareness boundaries break down, and a feeling of oneness with the universe emerges. It's kind of like a mystical experience, a sense of unity with the world. This state is called ego dissolution. Now, let's go through step by step what happens in the body after taking magic mushrooms. When you eat the mushroom, it usually takes between 20 to 40 minutes for the effects to kick in. Of course, if your stomach is empty, it can happen even faster. If you eat it with food or tea, it takes a little longer. The first stage is called the come up. During this time, you might feel your body getting lighter or heavier, feel a mild warmth or chill, and your vision may change a bit. For example, colors might look more saturated. For some people, this stage is exciting, but for others, it can be anxiety-inducing. About an hour later, you reach the peak. This is when the effects become more intense. Geometric patterns, wavy surfaces, walls that seem to breathe, or even seeing full images. The mind can become filled with geometric, spiritual, or completely bizarre thoughts. A minute can feel like an hour or the other way around. This peak period usually lasts between 2 to 3 hours. This is where many people experience a sense of unity with the universe or ego dissolution. Some people shed tears of joy, some people laugh, others might face fear or difficult memories. It all depends on what kind of trip they're having. Finally, you enter the landing or come down phase. In this stage, the effects gradually fade, but colors and sounds might still seem a bit different. Feeling calm and tired is very common. It's like coming back from a long journey. The whole experience usually lasts between 4 to 6 hours. But the next phase, called post-up or afterglow, can last for days or even weeks. This phase can show up as a sense of mental clarity, calmness, or a new motivation for positive changes. Or if you have a bad trip, it can feel like confusion or discomfort. Overall, a trip depends on 3 key factors. The first factor is set, meaning your mood and mindset before starting. The second factor is setting, which means the environment and the people you're with. And the third factor is the dose or how much you take. If all 3 factors are in sync, the chances of a safe and meaningful journey are much higher. But if any of these factors are off, the trip can turn into a nightmare. I'd like to go over some of the opinions that scientists have about magic mushrooms, or psilocybin mushrooms. Some scientists say that psilocybin helps the brain break out of its repetitive and limited patterns, which leads to increased creativity and reduced anxiety. Others say that this could trigger psychological episodes, especially in sensitive individuals. But what's truly interesting and profoundly important is that today, in modern medicine, they are actively researching the therapeutic use of magic mushrooms for effectively treating treatment-resistant depression, anxiety in cancer patients, nicotine or alcohol addiction, and post-traumatic stress disorder, among other conditions. In fact, extensive clinical trials have been conducted on some of these particular patients, which clearly showed that the carefully controlled use of psilocybin can significantly and positively change the lives of people who genuinely don't respond to conventional medications. For example, patients who had truly struggled with severe depression for many years showed significant and noticeable improvement after just 1 or 2 sessions of treatment with magic mushrooms. Now, it's interesting to know that Michael Pollan, in his famous and best-selling book in the New York Times in 2018 called How to Change Your Mind, what the new science of psychedelics teaches us about consciousness, death, addiction, depression, and transcendence. He says that psychedelics like magic mushrooms, contrary to what many people think, are not crazy-making substances, but on the contrary, they can actually help people become wiser. In this insightful book, Michael Pollan writes about his personal experience with using these powerful psychedelics and describes this profound trip as a kind of mental travelogue. There's also an interesting theory discussed by the author, philosopher, botanist, and American speaker Terence McKenna, who became famous for his ideas and research on psychedelics. This theory is called the stoned ape theory. But before I get into this theory, let me first introduce you to the concept of Homo erectus. Homo erectus refers to the upright human. In fact, Homo erectus refers to one of our ancestral species that stood and walked fully upright on two legs, not on all fours like animals. Their brains were larger than previous species, and they used more advanced stone tools. This group was probably the first to control fire. Now, Terence McKenna's stoned ape theory says that about 2 million years ago, our ancestors, Homo erectus or even earlier species, migrated from the forests to the grasslands. In this new environment, life revolved more around hunting animals and gathering plants and fruits. But the interesting point here is that in these grasslands, alongside the dung of wild cattle and other large herbivores, there were mushrooms containing psilocybin. McKenna believes that these curious ancestors tried these mushrooms, and right then and there, the spark of a mental revolution was ignited. According to McKenna, the effects of psilocybin mushrooms, depending on the dosage, led to the following outcomes. A low dose or microdose caused enhanced vision and pupil dilation. As a result, Homo erectus, by consuming low doses, became better at detecting movement and details in their environment, which in turn led to greater success in hunting, survival, and improved reproduction. McKenna considered this an evolutionary advantage. A moderate dose led to increased awareness of social energy, empathy, and a desire for group interaction. This phase might have even triggered the beginnings of primitive language or the earliest forms of communicative signaling. Some people believe that music and dance may have started from these very origins. A high dose led to mystical experiences and ego dissolution. In other words, a person would feel united with nature, the sky, animals, and the entire universe. These experiences may have contributed to the formation of early religious beliefs, symbolic art, and profound philosophical perspectives. Now, in the midst of all this, Paul Stamets, the famous American mycologist, also supports Terence McKenna's theory and says that while this idea might not be 100% scientific, it astonishingly aligns with patterns of brain development and the leaps in human creativity throughout history. Still, I personally think that magic mushrooms, despite their therapeutic potential, can also be extremely dangerous. So the most important point is that this experience should only be undertaken under the supervision of a doctor or a specialist, not just for fun or as an escape from reality. Because using them on your own can come with consequences. What do you think? Share your thoughts about using or not using magic mushrooms in the comments for me. But before we finally wrap up this discussion, let me also mention that psilocybin is indeed illegal in most countries around the entire world, except for certain specific research or medical cases. Of course, countries like the Netherlands, Jamaica, and some parts of Canada and the United States have more lenient and permissive laws, but it's still not legally permissible everywhere. Magic mushrooms are a complex journey into the world of our mind and psyche. Humanity has sought to understand for thousands of years. If we approach it with respect and awareness, it can open the door to new treatments and a better understanding of ourselves. But if we approach it recklessly and without knowledge, it can cause trouble, because using this psychedelic substance also comes with risks. From experiencing a bad trip and feeling intense anxiety, fear, or confusion, to worsening hidden mental disorders like schizophrenia, or interacting with certain medications. Let me add at the end that this video is made solely for awareness and educational purposes, and in no way encourages the use of this substance. Take care of yourselves.